writer-director duo of Catherine Michelle and Elisabetta Vidovic brings us Severed Silence, also known as The Accursed. This one starring Yancy Butler. Now the premise is this. We have a family of, I'm assuming kind of Romanian or some type of Eastern European kind of family who have come over to America, and they belong to a line of, I guess, witches, to be honest. People who have some type of magical paranormal powers. Gypsy kind of curse things like this. Anyway, and we see that in the prologue at the beginning of this movie, we have a situation where this particular kind of family is cursed for a reason that will become apparent in the film. And the remainder of the film is in kind of modern time, and we have the wedding of the kind of the youngest generation of this family, this guy who is kind of marrying this kind of outside girl, and they're at the wedding, and this curse seems to kind of rear its head. This long buried curse seems to kind of rear its head, and past sins are brought to the kind of the surface. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works. Okay. I have to say, the thing that struck me most about this film that I really enjoyed the acting, I have to say. Yancy Butler is not an actress I've ever been a particularly big fan of. She's okay, but I've never thought she was all that great in films that I've seen her in. But here, I thought she really shone as this kind of our main character, really. This mother who is kind of the mother of the groom, who's kind of getting married and stuff, and she's kind of ultimately the reason this curse is happening for an action that she kind of perpetrated, and she tried to kind of essentially make amends of it in a way by severing her hand. Reasons will be given in the movie, but I kind of quite liked her. I think she did a good job of having someone who is in tune with this world. And has one kind of foot in this culture of kind of mysticism, but also just her other foot in the kind of family life, and just kind of letting her kind of more humanity and kind of the human emotions and kind of doing things out of passion. I quite liked her performance, and I thought she was very good. But to be fair, I got to say, I thought the majority of the cast here all do a good job in believable roles. I have to say as well, this movie has some kind of creepy kind of scenes and things like this. The movie's never particularly kind of gory or with jump scares, but there is this kind of feeling of, just menace that hangs over this fantastic kind of location shooting that they've got in this kind of gothic kind of looking area, which is kind of overgrown and things like this. I just thought it really kind of lends itself to some quite kind of spooky kind of camera work, and the way it's kind of photographed. The colours are kind of very muted at times. It just has this kind of like this gothic kind of flavour to it. And I do feel the story has some interesting elements in the mythology. And then, now mythology I'm going to come on to again, because the mythology here is very dense. We get a lot of information, and there is some interesting stuff to be had there. We see different kind of spells getting put together. We see kind of fortunes being read, visions, things like this. There's kind of a lot kind of going on. And it's quite fascinating to kind of see this kind of almost like a, this kind of family of people who are, Wiccan or whatever you call it, witches, kind of all that kind of thing. I don't really know what you would necessarily kind of call this type of stuff, but paranormal in tuned, let's just say. And I actually found the mythology to have some very interesting elements. But therein lies the problem. Let's transition to what doesn't work. I feel the problem with this movie is it gets too wrapped up in its own mythology and becomes a confusing story at times. Let me just go into a little bit more detail about what I mean. And I think that the movie starts off on a bad foot. The kind of the prologue sequence here is an extraordinarily poor setup for the rest of the movie. because we simply don't really get what's going on. I think there's kind of setup, which is kind of a past scene that's happened, you know, some years prior to the main story. Does an incredibly poor job of kind of setting up what's going on. The relationships of people, you know, how they kind of relate to one another, what's actually going on, who certain characters are. It does an extraordinarily poor job of this. So when we kind of come to our story main, and we're going to have this you know, sequence that sets up the story, we're really in not a particularly good position, because we don't really know quite what was supposed to have happened and the kind of the circumstances that have led up to that. But even in the remainder of the movie, we see scenes here that we don't really know what's going on. People just seem to kind of drop dead for kind of no real reason. Some of the kind of the editing here, I think, is quite poor. We see people who kind of get cannon fodder ultimately, that kind of get brought in, and then I feel like they've just disappeared. Things like this. The way this story is kind of put together, and there's so much kind of like, oh, if we do this spell, we can get that result, or that, this, and the other, and all these kind of elements that are kind of introduced, like loopholes to try and get around the curse and things, and oh, we can try this. There's just things here that aren't developed properly. So the story is very kind of muddled, and then there's a reveal about a particular character's motivations, incredibly poorly handled. And it needed to be seeded earlier. It doesn't quite make sense in regards to biology, I have to say. Again, it's just stuff here that I thought was very poorly handled in a narrative sense. So the narrative kind of like through line for this movie is very poorly handled. So it's I feel the filmmakers here have got some nice surfacey stuff that kind of looks cool, or some good ideas, but then how they've kind of strung it together is just all over the place. Now, the other thing as well, there's some very poor CGI in this movie. I was actually surprised because I didn't think it needed it. There are some kind of supernatural elements in this movie that it just seemed unnecessary to me, because it just seemed to, I didn't really added much, and it almost seemed a little bit silly. For example, we have these animated plants that are kind of like seemingly like snakes, and whilst the movie is obviously a kind of supernatural and paranormal movie, it seemed relatively grounded. But then we have these CGI plant snake things that just look way over the top, and we just have to accept that these thorns that are kind of acting like snakes and stuff didn't really make a lot of sense. And even like we have at the wedding, for example, you know, we have this bride who we led to believe is a complete outsider. Oh yeah, these magic bushes, and just kind of gloss over it. It's just really poorly handled at times, and like I said, the CGI doesn't really help with that because it looks so poor. But that's not the only instance. Even I think the practical makeup when we see let's just say our antagonist, it's again not particularly impressive and doesn't really make sense with, I feel, the what's happened. The look of our antagonist, I don't really feel is indicative of what you would expect, is the best way of describing the fate of what happened to them. It just seems like I don't really understand why this antagonist looks like this. In a way, could have done more there. It kind of just looks not particularly interesting, and I don't feel story-wise it's coherent with the actual plot either. So I feel this movie is a little bit of a mess, and I've seen this in a few kind of like lower budget movies. This to me feels like this is the product that the filmmakers wanted to make, but it's not a film that I feel is that like people going in cold can really enjoy, and kind of like I don't quite see where that's going. Obviously, people involved with the production know ultimately where this movie should go, and they have their kind of vision for it, so they're kind of filling in the gaps. But someone coming in, as a kind of a cold to this movie, it doesn't really all kind of hang together, to be honest. Like maybe it's the fact that we have two people directing here. I know that there have been some good examples of that, but you know, maybe you needed a singular, a singular vision here, but at the same time, you know, I would also argue that you maybe needed someone to kind of push back and say, this needs to be easier to understand. The story here is too convoluted. There's too many elements that are involved, and they're not kind of like told in a fashion that's kind of, a strong narrative. So for me, it's a 4 out of 10. Interesting ideas, very, very interesting ideas, and good actors, good work by the cast, but it's wasted, I feel, on a very poorly told story. So it's a 4 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.